Number 10. Passage de Gois in France. Why would you go to France? Because it's romantic and you can eat your body weight in cheese. And what would be more romantic than taking a scenic drive from the mainland over the ocean to a beautiful island? Oh my god, it sounds like the end of a rom-com starring Matthew McConaughey. Until you get stuck in the middle of the ocean. Le Passage de Gois is a lovely little road that is a connection between mainland France and the secluded island of Noirmoutier. It's a little over 4 clicks and it passes right over the ocean, and for whatever reason they didn't build the road high enough to deal with the changing tides. So if you decide to make this journey at the wrong time of day, the ocean will sweep your car into the blue and you'll turn your romantic French honeymoon into you and your fiance yelling Wilson out of volleyball. To make the road sound even more pleasant, it's even dangerous to drive while the tide is down, because the ocean is constantly glazing the road in sea gunk, making it super slippery. So even if you make the drive at the right time, you still might hit some seaweed and spin out like Mario Kart.
Coming in at number 9 is the Hitchhiker, and I'm pretty sure everyone has heard some type of variation of this one, so let's just get into it. This legend centers around some mysterious hitchhikers which we already know we shouldn't be picking up or giving a ride. A cab driver found someone dressed in all black with a hood over their face looking for a ride. He picked them up and the person gave an address the driver wasn't familiar with but assured him he could give him directions. They get further and further out, taking back roads and alleys, and eventually they're out of the city completely. Rattled, the driver asks if they're going the right way, to which the person says, "Don't worry, we're almost there." They end up on a road that's basically falling apart, and at this point the driver finally turns around to ask where exactly they're going, to find the back seat empty, and by the time he turns back around he realizes he's heading straight for the edge of a cliff and plummets to his death. Now I'm not sure whether this legend is supernatural in any way, like is a hitchhiker a real person, are they a ghost, how did they vanish from the car like that, I'm confused. Either way, just be very wary when you're picking up hitchhikers. Actually just don't do it. Don't do it. At number 8 we have the waiting car, and apparently this has happened to many people on road trips. But let's look at one family's experience in particular. Every summer this family would go on a road trip from North Texas to Mexico, and when you're on a stretch of highway in the middle of the desert, it's not really a big deal if the same car has been behind you for ages. I mean, there's not really anywhere else it can go. So at this point the family had been in Mexico for an hour but had a few more hours of the drive left. The user's mum suddenly goes to her dad, "Miguel, that car behind us, it's been behind us since we left Laredo." And the dad responded with what I said earlier about it not being that big of a deal. But then eventually the car behind them started getting closer, and at one point it was practically touching their rear. The other car was playing with them, it would ease off them, then blind them with their headlights, then tailgate them again, etc. And thankfully the mum saw a police car up ahead and they pulled over. After telling the cop what happened, the policeman told them how people had their cars stolen on empty highways by criminals and thugs. He drove behind them for a while for safekeeping, and around 10 minutes later they saw the same car from before on the side of the road waiting for them. Filling our number 7 slot are Hell's Angels. So originally people thought this myth or legend originated sometime in the 90s in LA, but apparently it started in the early 80s in Montana with the Hell's Angels biker gang as the centerpiece. It goes like this. If you're ever driving home late and you pass a car that has its high beams on, as a courtesy gesture you would usually flash your high beams at them to let them know so they stop blinding every driver passing them. But in this instant, a car with high beams on isn't just accidental. If you flashed your high beams at these cars, that was basically you signing your own death warrant. Cars like that were usually driven by initiates for local gangs, mainly Hell's Angels, and their initiation, I guess, was for them to kill you. So next time you decide to go on a road trip, be very careful on who you signal to. Now at number 6 is the petrol pump trap. I think the thing that gives me the most anxiety while driving is running out of petrol and there being no petrol pumps within like a 10-kilometer radius of me, and I'm just like, wow, I'm gonna be stuck here forever, what do I do? But anyways, sometimes finding a petrol pump just isn't that lucky at all. There are so many legends surrounding petrol pumps and bad things happening to people at them, you'd be surprised. Apparently, gas stations are a popular place for people to get ambushed. This story in particular is about 2 girls who were on a road trip and decided to stop for gas at 10 PM. They found a petrol pump that was for the most part not shady at all. It was brightly lit, looked clean, looked busy with other cars, it seemed perfectly fine. The only open pump was in the middle of the station, so the girl got out to fill the tank. As she unscrewed the gas cap, she heard a shout and then turned around to see a man with a gun and a group of people with him. She soon realized all the cars around her were empty and they were decoys, and it was actually a trap for whoever drove into it. The man started yelling at her to to get onto the ground and for her friend to get out of the car, otherwise he'd shoot them or rape them or worse. Her friend sat frozen in the car, so the other girl offered to go in and talk to her and get her out. But then obviously instead of talking to her friend, she puts the car in reverse and they both managed to escape. That was just one of many stories about things like this happening, so it's definitely not even a legend but a real thing. Coming in at number 5 is Port Perry Ghost Road. Now legend has it that on this road a motorcyclist crashed at night and was killed sometime in the 1950s. Ever since then, drivers on the road seem to see a motorcycle light in their rearview mirror. The light then catches up to the car and passes it before disappearing entirely. Other accounts say they've just seen a red light roaming the road at night, but you somehow are never able to trace its source. Shady. Just pure shady. And many TV documentaries have been made about the legend and it's become quite a tourist attraction. However, with every legend there are skeptics. Locals who have lived in and around the area for generations say there was no motorcycle accident around the time of the legend. Having said that, the Ontario Ghosts and Hauntings Research Society, which I didn't even know existed, maintain that there are ghost lights in the area and a dead body was found in the area in the 60s or 70s, so even if a motorcyclist didn't die, this road really should be avoided at all costs. At number 4 is the Cult Trap. Again, variations of this legend always float around, so it's hard to pinpoint really which story was the original, but anyway, legend has it that a man was driving through a bunch of rural back roads at night because he thought it would be a shortcut compared to his usual route. At one point the roads led him to a long road that was surrounded by crops or tall grass. Halfway down the road they see a car, and in some stories it's on one side of the road, in others it's parked over 2 lanes, but in all variations the boot and doors are always open. Clothes are strewn all over the road and there are 2 bodies on the ground. Obviously the driver's first reaction is to get out and help the people, but when they go to call the ambulance they realize they have no service. And then things get a bit fishy. Everything just seems too accident-like, almost like it had been staged. Now the next part has many variations. Sometimes the driver just completely avoids the scene and goes around it, another has him seeing reflections of light on eyes in the grass by the road, but either way, as the person drives away they see the 2 bodies on the ground getting on their knees and 20 people magically emerging from the tall grass. Had the person stayed, well, we can all guess what would have become of him or her. Filling our number 3 slot is the Pavement Bigfoot. I just tried to be creative there, but there's a legend that surrounds Bray Road in the town of Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Even the name of the town sounds Lord of the Rings-esque. But anyway, to any person, Bray Road looks pretty, peaceful and normal, surrounded by crops and greenery. It looks as good as any road really. False. By night, the beast of Bray is said to haunt a certain part of Bray Road. Eyewitness reports have varied throughout time, but the beast is meant to have Bigfoot-like proportions, and many have speculated that it's actually in fact a werewolf. But honestly, if you're giving me a choice between running into Bigfoot on my road trip or running into a werewolf, I would honestly choose none and just cancel my trip. Is that not the obvious choice here? I'm not about to get stuck in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin with the beast of Bray Road ready to attack me in the sidelines. That's just a hard no from me, and it should be a hard no from you too. Now at number 2 is Route 2A. Now Route 2A is a dangerous route located in Haynesville, Maine. Now this one is known for the high number of accidents that happen there, the bad driving conditions, and the whole host of spirits that have been seen there over the past few years, or decades really. Great, everything that makes a road not drivable. You know a road is problematic when there's even a song about it called A Tombstone Every Mile. Need I say more? Whilst many people have died in car accidents there, there's also an urban legend surrounding the road. Many people have seen a woman shouting at drivers passing by and saying how her husband is trapped in their car and that they need help. But if you do end up stopping for her, she just disappears. The story goes that the husband got stuck in there and died of carbon monoxide poisoning, and the wife either froze to death outside waiting for help or she was hit by a car, and hence they have some unfinished business with the area. Other accounts have said they've seen a little girl on the side of the road that was killed by a truck years ago. Either way, let's just not. And finally, at number 1 is Shades of Death Road. Honestly, this one can be done in 5 seconds because all I have to say is look at the name of the road, have 1 brain cell, don't travel on it. The end. But no, seriously, Shades of Death Road, real name by the way, is a quiet country lane located in Warren County, New Jersey, and the legends surrounding this road are plentiful. The road runs alongside an old haunted lake bed which has pillars of mist rising from it, and no one knows how that's caused, but it's just there. Apparently early settlers killed native Indians and threw them into the lake, and their unhappy souls lived on to haunt the lake and the road. Some say they've seen the dead walk alongside the road amidst the mist. People in the area say the sight site used to be the location of so many deaths they thought it was cursed. Another story was that the original people who lived in the area were a band of squatters, of vile men who used to fight each other for women, and those fights would result in someone always dying. As their reputation grew, the area started being called Shades of Death. Another story was that it was actually called the Shades originally because of the low-hanging trees that formed a canopy, which made it easier for murders to happen there and stay unsolved. Either way, whichever story you believe, this road is one you should definitely try to avoid for a plethora of reasons, and I just told you all of them.
Coming in at number 10, we have this story of the delivery man. Of course, this creepy story happened around Death Valley, a hot and sparse desert in East California. This story comes from a Reddit user who shares an experience their parents had around 20 years ago. They said that their parents were planning on a weekend trip to a hotel around 30 minutes outside of Death Valley town, right in the middle of the desert. When they got to the place they were staying in, it looked totally abandoned. The dad got out of the car to look around and the mum stayed inside. Out of nowhere, a guy holding a bunch of newspapers turned up and started approaching the mum, whose window in the car was open. He said that his motorbike had broken down and that he delivered papers to Death Valley town. If he didn't get them there, he would lose his job. The mum couldn't see the motorbike and had a very bad feeling about the guy. Now the guy begged her to let him in the car and she refused. Eventually the dad came back around the corner and the paper delivery guy looked panicked. He dropped his papers and ran off into the desert. When the mum and dad went to check into the hotel, the receptionist told them that actually they don't get newspapers delivered to the hotel at all. When they checked the newspapers, they dated back to 1954. Now I'm wondering, was he a murderer or a local ghost?
Number 9. The Zoji Pass in India. Have you ever driven over a bridge and been like, holy crap, we're really high up? But thank God there's guard railings and traffic lights and proper traffic markings on the road, and it's not on the side of the mountain, and one wrong turn won't lead to me tumbling to my death? Well, the Zoji Pass in India is all these things and more. The Zoji Pass in India is the second highest pass in the whole world. It sits at 3,528 meters of elevation, so if you fall off this road, it's enough to kill you like 3,000 times over. It's also extremely important because it connects the people of an isolated city called Ladakh to the rest of the world. Imagine if you live in Ladakh and you're like, I gotta catch a flight, so I gotta make this extremely dangerous journey across this mountain trail. At least if you can do that, you're probably not afraid of flying. Number 8. Dalton Highway, Alaska. If you grew up anywhere secluded with a harsh winter, then you probably know what it's like to take a long drive through snow-covered roads. Well, this is like that, but 1,000 times more. The Dalton Highway is in Alaska, and it starts right off the Elliott Highway and spans 667 kilometers. Most of the road is covered with ice year-round, and it's riddled with potholes. This road also passes through the middle of nowhere, so if your car breaks down along the way, you kind of have two options: freeze to death or get eaten by wolves. Also, there's winds along this road that are so strong they'll pick up rocks and throw them at your car, only increasing your chance of becoming some Wolverine's brunch. If you weren't convinced about how you should never drive along this long stretch of road, here's something else for you. The road ends in a place called Deadhorse, which is near the Arctic. I can only imagine this town got its name from back in the day when you would ride your horse up there and soon after your horse would die. You'll never catch me on this stretch of land, I bet it. I would sooner get into an Uber with the wrong license plate. Number 7. The GUOLIANG Tunnel Road in China. This road is kind of a marvel of craftsmanship and necessity. The road is carved through a mountain in China by the people of the Guoliang village. They were cut off from the rest of the world, so they decided to blast their way through a mountain so they could get to the nearest Starbucks. What makes this road so dangerous is it's under constant construction, and because parts of the road actually pass through the mountain, there's always a chance that part of the tunnel could collapse on you and crush you to death. Number 6. The TIANMEN Mountain Road in China. This one literally looks like a final track from Mario Kart. Just imagining all the twists and turns could give someone motion sickness. The TIANMEN Road in China is something that looks like a rally car driver's wet dreams with 99 ultra tight turns on a very thin road. You can't even take your eyes off the road for a second because the lanes are so close and tight together that it would definitely lead to you smashing into some oncoming traffic. Not to mention the massive elevation change that you go through from bottom to top. There's an 1100 meter elevation change. How many times would you have to pop your ears? There are some protective barriers along the road, but with how tight and twisty everything is and how high the mountain is and how close you are to the side, it wouldn't take much for you and your car to take a one-way bungee jump off the side of the mountain. Number 5. EYRE Highway, Australia. This road seems like it has all the makings of a perfectly safe road. There's no problem with potholes or any kind of maintenance. The road doesn't have a lot of twists and turns. It doesn't even cross over any sort of natural risk like a massive sandstorm or massive thunderstorm. But just like your parents telling you that you're going to Disney World and then they take you to the dentist, this road is full of deceit. The road stretches for 1,675 kilometers through one of the most remote areas of Australia. So if you encounter any sort of car trouble, I hope you brought loads of water and you know how to use a rattlesnake as a socket wrench, because it's going to be a while before anyone comes to help you. On top of that, the road is so straight and featureless that people often veer off the road into ditches or into oncoming traffic. There's so little going on that it lulls you to sleep and then you crunch into an oncoming pickup. This road bores you to death. So many people have met their gruesome end by numbing boredom that the road has been nicknamed Slaughter Valley. Number 4. North Yungas Road in Bolivia. I don't even know if you can call this one a road. It's more like a path or some open space someone just threw asphalt on 30 years ago. The road mostly hugs the mountainside of the North Yungas region in Bolivia. And with me just glossing over how dangerous the area is, with rebels and small wars constantly being waged in the area, the road is a complete mess with zero forms of safety precautions. Most of it isn't paved at all, and the parts that are paved have giant cracks and potholes in them. It's a normal occurrence for entire buses to roll over the road and tumble down into the jungle below. It's been given the nickname Death Road for good reason. There are crosses and grave markings all along the side of this strip symbolizing where people have met their end. Why are people still driving on a road after it's called Death Road? Number 3. HALSEMA Highway in the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Lush jungles, beautiful beaches, magnificent mountains. But if you want to see all the amazing scenery, it might cost you. And by that I mean you might die. The HALSEMA Highway in the Philippines goes up to one of the biggest tourist attractions in the country. The road going up, however, is not as nice to look at, as it's extremely narrow and there are constantly speeding tour buses rushing up and down the mountain. Head-on collision is commonplace on this road. At least that's all the problems. Well, that's all of your problems if you're traveling in the summer. If you try to go up there any other time of year, nature will make sure you suffer along the way. You could get hit by a dense fog, falling rocks, monsoon rains, mudslides, all of which could push your car off the road and send you falling down the 2,000-meter fall. Hey, but if you make it to the top, it's gonna look great for your Instagram. Number 2. Jalalabad, Kabul, Afghanistan. This one is kind of like Mad Max with no guns. The Jalalabad-Kabul road in Afghanistan passes over the Kabul Gorge and is at 600 meters of elevation. We've had roads much higher than this on this list already, but what makes this road so much more dangerous is the massive haul trucks that are constantly driving on the road for transportation. Because of this, drivers get extremely reckless and are constantly trying to pass these trucks on an extremely narrow road, a road that can barely fit 2 of these trucks side by side. So you have massive trucks zooming by, with people driving like maniacs on a little tiny road, all slapped on the side of the mountain where one wrong move could leave you tumbling into a gorge. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the road passes through Taliban controlled areas. So at the beginning when I said this is like Mad Max without the guns, I actually meant it's just like Mad Max. And number 1 on this list is the KARAKORAM highway from China to Pakistan. Now we've got a massive international highway that passes through some of the harshest conditions you can come across. The KARAKORAM highway is one of the most elevated paved international highways in the world. It maxes out at 4,693 meters. That's 15,397 feet, baby. The road is so high that many drivers crash because they start suffering from altitude sickness while they're behind the wheel. The road is so high up and the air is so thin that it's literally too thin to breathe. It's like, remember, put your hands at 10 and 2 and always keep your oxygen mask on. The road also passes through several mountains and canyons with brutal conditions. Everything from sandstorms, blizzards, to floods. It's like living in the movie 2012 all packed into a family road trip. And if that was enough, because the road is so long and passes through so many deserted areas, bandits will wait for you to come by so they can jack your car. Okay, I lied before. This road is like Mad Max.
Starting us off at number 10 is Route 666. What a fitting number. Also known as the Devil's Highway, Route 666 is a 200-mile north-south carriageway that goes through New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, etc. And funnily enough, the route was renamed to Route 491 back in 2003 because of the original traditional satanic associations and the fact that so many accidents have taken place on it. Every time a fatal or non-fatal accident has happened on the road, it's always been blamed on the name of the road, not maybe someone with a DUI or anything, but the name of the road. Everyone just assumes something paranormal is definitely at play here. Many Native Americans believe skinwalkers are the reasons for all the accidents because they appear out of nowhere and so suddenly, so cars just have to swerve out of the way. Shamans even warn drivers not to continue, but then would have to be summoned to take the lives of those who did not heed his warnings. If skinwalkers aren't bad enough, even hellhounds have been noted to patrol regions of the road in packs. Witnesses have said the hounds have kept pace with the cars no matter how fast they were going. And of course they can also shred your tires with their claws or teeth, or both, and then proceed to maul you inside your car. Paranormal aside, even mechanical failures seem to be more common on this highway than others. Flat tires, overheating, breakdowns, everything apparently. There's even a haunted truck that collides with cars on purpose to run them off the road, which is just personally just not what I'm looking for on a road trip. That's just not really my vibe, personally.
Coming into number 9, we have the Norwegian mountain menace. This story was posted by Tonbury King on Reddit. They said that they and their buddy decided to go on a late night drive into the Norwegian mountains to watch the sunrise across the land, which sounds really nice. He said that the drive up the mountain was very enjoyable, and there's also a bar at the top. Although they knew it would be closed, they thought they could sit on the benches, have a little smoke, have a little chat, and just take in the view. On the way up, they saw a person sitting on a boulder. They only realised what they saw after they'd driven by, and as it was late and the roads can be a bit treacherous, they thought they'd reverse back and see if the person was okay. This is just classic Norwegian politeness, and good on them. Unfortunately, their act of kindness led to some serious spooks. They saw the person was a woman with a long white dress and long beautiful hair. She turned to look at them and they called out to her. I'm gonna read what the Redditor wrote here. Her face was 3 times the length of a normal person's face. Her eyes were completely blank and she had a smile on her face. Creepy. The Redditor also said that they were nearly paralysed with fear, but they drove on anyway. The next day, both of the guys in the car contracted a high fever that lasted for days. Coincidence, or maybe not? Coming into number 8, we have the midnight scratching. So this story comes from a Reddit post around 4 years ago. It seems that a guy was driving back from a family reunion. He decided not to stay the night because he had to work the next day. After 45 minutes on the road, he said he felt a very big wave of tiredness come over him. He simply couldn't operate the car anymore, so he decided, do you know what, I'm gonna have a nap. There was no lay-by or any place that he could park off the road, so he decided to drive into a field and park his car behind some trees. He then fell asleep at 11:20 but was woken up 30 minutes later by a scratching sound. He was really tired, he had a quick look at the clock and he decided just to ignore it, assuming it was probably an animal. He then went to sleep but was awoken by the same sound around 50 minutes later, and this time he was super freaked out. He thought actually maybe it wasn't animals, because why would they continually scratch for an hour? He looked into his rearview mirror and he saw someone or something running off into the forest. He decided to drive and head back to the road. He was done with this. As he drove forward, he saw an abandoned car with its doors open. Now he drove a little closer to investigate, and then a man came sprinting around the corner, yelling at him to get away from his car. The guy was pretty terrified and drove off. He said that the moral of the story was not to go sleeping at the side of deserted roads, and I've got to say, hear hear. Coming into number 7, we have the pickup trucks. This story was submitted to the subreddit Let's Not Meet. A girl and her friend Amy were driving from Redizo to Albuquerque. As the girls loved exploring, they took the NM55, a more remote road. They saw a white pickup truck ahead of them in the distance, and when they got closer, they saw that the truck turned across both lanes and then pulled over across the road. When they drove by, they noticed that the driver was a middle-aged guy who was staring at them very intently and talking into a walkie-talkie. When they passed him, he pulled back on the highway and started following them. They then noticed another pickup truck slowly coming towards them. Now this one was an older, more beat-up truck. When they passed it, they noticed that the guy was also talking into a walkie-talkie. The truck passed and then turned to follow them behind the white truck. The white truck then tried to bump them, but they kept on speeding faster. It then became apparent that the trucks were trying to get the car in between them. Now luckily for the girls, a US Park Service car came off a little side road, and then both of the trucks U-turned. The girls were freaked out though, and they had no idea what the intention of the truck guys were. Coming into number 6, real life could be scarier than any movie. Apparently so. Now this story comes from a road trip from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. The driver went through Amboy, a ghost town well below sea level and reportedly a location for satanic activity. The driver stopped by the Amboy sign to take pictures to show friends. As they drove forward through the deserted town and onwards through a canyon, they saw a red car stopped in the middle of the road. As they got closer, they saw a suitcase and 2 bodies lying face down. Feeling truly freaked out and uneasy, obviously the driver drove on, pulling out their 9mm pistol from under their seat because they really had a niggling feeling that it was a trap. I wouldn't stop. I mean, I would call the police later, but this is a lot. When they passed the scene, they then looked into the rearview mirror and they saw that the so-called bodies were getting up and around 20 people were emerging from long grass. The driver then hit the accelerator and motored forward. Now they recalled their experience saying, "I will never know what would have happened to me if I'd gotten out of the car. Somehow I don't think it would have been very good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie." I agree. Honestly, sometimes my life is scarier than a scary movie. Coming into number 5, nothing good happens after 2 AM. I feel like this was an episode of How I Met Your Mother. Either way, sometimes I have to agree. A guy wrote a long and winding tale about a trip he took from Nashville to Kentucky and back again. He'd got into a fight with his girlfriend and he'd wanted to drive to blow off some steam. As he was headed to Alabama, he realized he was running low on gas, so he pulled off Interstate 65 and drove off the ramp near a gas station. This is when he noticed something very strange. The only other car on the road was stopped at a green light. It was after 3 AM and the guy driving figured it was weird, but might just have been because the other driver was tired. When the light turned red, the car rolled forward, pulled under the overpass and turned its lights off. The driver didn't want to go forward when the lights went green again, so they waited. When the lights went green a second time, they decided, you know what, they're just gonna move on, and the guy then started following him. When he got to the gas station, there was also a police officer. Now he thought, well, maybe I'm gonna be safe. That being said, the stalker also followed him into the gas station, parked and got into the lineup. After the road tripper paid, the stalker also left the line to follow him again. Now the driver said he sped through some red lights on his way home, and it's still the creepiest thing that's ever happened to him. So I visited the Golden Gate Bridge in December and it was really beautiful. That being said, I did have a scary time there, but that is a whole different story for a different day. At number 4, we have the story of the Bay Bridge. So San Francisco has a number of beautiful bridges, including the Bay Bridge and the famous Golden Gate Bridge. A man and his granddaughter were driving the epic route from San Diego to Portland, and they were stopping in San Francisco. They drove over the Bay Bridge and were struck by a diversion. The diversion led them into a district of a town with no streetlights and a very eerie vibe. The roads were deserted, but not just that, the streets seemed deserted too. A car drove by, but it was a Japanese model 1930s car. Eventually the detour took them over the Golden Gate Bridge, which was very dark with not even the toll booths open. The granddaughter, Kate, who was driving, started to go over the bridge, but she said she felt a force with her in the car trying to turn her around. Eventually, she managed to shake it off and drive forwards. And when she spoke to one of her friends who lived in San Francisco about the experience, they said that the Golden Gate is never dark, it's always lit up, and that area couldn't have been deserted as there was a festival on in town that day. Spooky. Okay, we've had loads of fun with Reddit here, but let's move on to some news-officiated real-life road trip stories that made national headlines. Coming into number 3, we have the murder of Peter Falconio. This story scares me so much as it is so simple and so easily replicated. On July 14th, 2001, Joanne Lees and her boyfriend Peter Falconio were driving on the Stewart Highway near Alice Springs in the Australian outback. Road tripping around, the couple in their 20s were enjoying a backpacking vacation in a VW camper van. As they were on the road, a driver in a Toyota 4-wheel drive flagged them down. He said he'd spotted that they had engine trouble and Peter got out to investigate while Joanne got into the driver's seat to rev the car. That is when she heard shots. She was terrified, and then the man reappeared at her window holding a gun to her head. Now he managed to tie her hands behind her back with cable ties and was dragged into the back of a man's car. When he was distracted, moving Peter's body, the girl then fled into the bush, fearing for her life and fearing she was going to be raped. She managed to successfully hide, and the man looked for her, passing close by, but he never found her. He later drove off with her boyfriend's body. Later, Joanne flagged down a road train driver who rescued her. Now the body of Peter Falconio has never been found, but the killer was later identified by DNA on Joanne. John Murdoch was found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison. So not all road trips are taken in cars. A lot of cyclists take road trips hitting the pavement with 2 wheels. Sometimes it can be the ultimate way to experience the open road. Unfortunately, what this cyclist discovered will haunt them forever. At number 2, we have the Annecy Killings. The Al-Hilli family were on a holiday in France and taking a road trip through the Alps when they were shot in their red BMW. Parents Saad and Iqbal's mother were killed. The family's 2 daughters were wounded but luckily survived, although their 4-year-old was found hidden under her dead mother's legs 8 hours after police got to the scene. Next to the car, a French cyclist, Sylvain Mollier, was also shot dead. The scene was discovered by another cyclist, Brett Martin, who rode by the horrifying scene. While the murder investigation was opened, the perpetrator of the 2012 attack has not been found. Some investigators think that the murders were random, which is scarier because there could be a deranged killer waiting to strike again. Finally, coming into number 1, we have the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. I would never hitchhike, but probably only because of stories like this one. I get it though, it's a cheap way to take a road trip. In the 1970s, there were no real frame of reference as to how dangerous hitchhiking could be, but then the murders started happening. Between 1972 and 1973, 6 women were found dead and naked in rural areas near creeks next to roads. All of the bodies were of females. They were hitchhikers who were traveling around Sonoma County and Santa Rosa in California. The murders are still unsolved to this day.